Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm glad that we're that we're able to make it. Today is Wednesday. It is October the 21st. We're getting ready for Parshas Noach. I thank everyone for joining in, and I've got on the screen, I've got the sources that we're going to be using this morning, just in case anyone wasn't able to print that out. So again, a good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. Hope everyone is well. Thank you for participating. So as I said, this week we're going to be reading Parshas Noach. And I wanted to share with you some sources on Noach. Some of them you may be familiar with, and some of them may be new. So let's take a look. We're going to take a look at some of the Mefarshim, some of the commentaries that can be found on just the first two psukim. The first two psukim of Noach, believe it or not, there's a lot of material there. So let's see. The Parsha begins, Ela Toldos Noach. These are the Toldos. Toldos usually means the generations of Noach. And then it goes, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorasav. By the way, you should know about Noach. He was a very righteous man. He was perfect in his generation. Es Elokim isalech Noach. And Noach walked along with God. He was doing the right thing at a when so many others were not. Next pasuk Yud, Vayoled Noach shlosha banim. Noach had three sons together with his wife. Now, in last week's Parsha, one of the people that we read about, her name was Na'amah. And Rashi there quotes Chazal and says Na'amah was actually the wife of Noach. In this week's Parsha, she's not identified by name, but knowing that Na'amah showed up in last week's Parsha, and Rashi there informing us that Chazal had a tradition that was the Eshes Noach, the wife of Noach, that's what makes me confident to say in this pasuk here in Yud, Vayoled Noach shlosha banim, that Noach had three sons. Who do you have him with? With his wife Na'amah. So Noach and Na'amah together, they had these three children. What were their names? Eshem, Escham, Yafes. These were the three sons of Noach, and they're the ones that we're going to be reading about in this week's Parsha. This family is the only family that was saved at the time of the Mabul, at the time of that devastating flood, which destroys the world. So let's start by looking at Rashi. Rashi is going on the first pasuk of the Parsha. Again, the first pasuk began. It says, Ela Toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach. The pasuk then gives us this piece of information. Noach was a very righteous man. And in the next pasuk, in Yud, we're told what the names of his children are. So let's see Rashi. Ela Toldos Noach. Noach is Tzadik. These are the generations of Noach. And by the way, we have to all know, Noach was a very, very righteous person. Okay, so let's see what happens with all this information. So we get as follows. So Rashi says, Ho'il v'hizkiru sefer b'shvacho. Since we've already started to mention Noach, before we go on, let's sing his praises. Shenamar, because there's a pasuk in Mishlei that says, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, that whenever a Tzadik is mentioned, it's a blessing. What's Rashi addressing? Rashi's addressing an obvious problem in this pasuk. This pasuk seems like something went wrong. The pasuk begins saying, Ela Toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach. So right away, we should have pasuk Yud that says, yeah, who are his generations? He had these three kids, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. Why does the pasuk digress, get sidetracked and say, oh, you mentioned Noach, let me tell you something about Noach. Noach was an Ish Tzadik, and he was Elokim Isalech Noach, he walked with God. Where did that come from? Why did the pasuk seem to get sidetracked? So that's what Rashi's addressing. You know why you got sidetracked? Because of this concept of Zecher Tzadik Levracha, that if you mention the name of a Tzadik, you ought to sing his praises. And that's what's going on here. We mentioned Noach, now it's time to sing his praises. That's the first way, that's the first shot that Rashi gives to understand why it looks like the pasuk digressed. Let's see the second shot Rashi gives. Davar acher. What's another explanation? Why did the pasuk do this? Why did the pasuk start by saying, I'm about to tell you the generations of Noach, and then it gives us this other information about how righteous he was? Why didn't it just tell us the names of his children? So Rashi says, Davar acher. There's another explanation. Lamedcha, this is to teach you. She'ikar toldoseim shel tzadikim maisim tovim. You know what is the ikar, the main, I guess what you would count as the generations of a tzaddik not so much their physical children, but their ma'asim tovim, their good deeds that they've done. If you want to know what clearly identifies a person as saying, like, wow, they brought a lot into this world, yes, children are one thing to look at, but what's even the ikr, what's more important is look at their good deeds. What good did they bring into this world? That is not just something which could be considered toldos, generations, but it's even ikr. It might even be more important. So that's how the second shot of Rashi. So again, what's Rashi bothered by? He's looking at the pasuk. The pasuk seems to be strange. The pasuk says, Ela toldos Noach. I'm about to tell you the generations of Noach. Okay, but that information's in pasuk Yud about his children, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Why are you digressing now to tell me this? Noach was an Ish Tzaddik, was as Elokim Yishalech Noach. So the first shot is that's what we do. We digress. When I mention a tzaddik, we sing his praises. The second shot, Rashi says, is because no, that's also toldos. That's not a digression. Telling me that he was a tzaddik, that's also the toldos. Those are also the generations of Noach, because those are his ma'asim tovim. Those are his offspring. Those are his ma'asim tovim. And not just are those his toldos, not just are those considered his offspring, but that's ikar toldosan. That's even the main. And that's why those are listed before the children. So before we list the children, we first talk about his ma'asim tovim, about his good deeds that Noach was involved in. That's how Rashi learns this. So I want to share with you two sources now. We've mentioned this before. Rashi wrote a commentary to the Chumash, but there's been numerous works written over the years, commentaries to Rashi. Rashi is such a primary commentary that all of the Talmidei Chachamim who came after Rashi understood that if Rashi said something, it carries an incredible amount of weight with it. Therefore, we need to analyze Rashi's words to best understand how did he arrive at what he said. So I'm going to share with you two of the most common sources we turn to when we want to understand Rashi. One is the Sifsei Chachamim, and the other is the Gurriere. The Gurriere was written by the Maharal of Prague. That's his super commentary on Rashi. So let's first see the Sifsei Chachamim. What both the Sifsei Chachamim and the Gurriere are going to do is they want to get to the bottom of this. How did Rashi get this idea that the Iker told us the main generations of a person are their good deeds? Where did Rashi see that in the pasuk? So let's see. Two ideas here. First, from the Sifsei Chachamim. Sifsei Chachamim says she'ikar told us that the main idea when you're counting someone's generations, the main idea look at their good deeds. So look at what Sifsei Chachamim says. V'nira li, it appears to me, the Ritzono Lomar, what does Rashi mean? Noach. By the fact that the pasuk begins, the verse begins saying, these are the generations of Noach. Umefarish, and then it goes on to say, Noach ish tzaddik. It doesn't tell us about his children. It tells us Noach was a tzaddik. He was a very righteous fellow. Shmami, no. What do I see from this? The ma'asim tovim ikri nami toldos. By the fact that the pasuk began saying, I'm about to tell you the toldos, the generations of Noach, and then it tells me he was a tzaddik, that he had a lot of good deeds. So what does that tell me? That good deeds are considered someone's offsprings. That's their generations. Umidinakat betchila ish tzaddik. And by the fact, okay, now that it's a given that good deeds are offspring and children is also offspring, well, which one did it list first? Did it list the children first or did it list the good deeds? So he says, Umidinakat betchila ish tzaddik. By the fact that it first lists Noach was a tzaddik, all his good deeds, but achar kach, and only after that does it say Vayola Noach, that he also had physical children. Shma mina, we see from this the ma'asim tovim ikar told us saying that the primary item that might be called generations or the children, the offspring of a person, are their good deeds. Not just are good deeds qualified to be called generational or offspring. But if one has to decide between physical children and good deeds, which one is the ikr, which one is the main source, which you would put a label on that says toldos? So he says it would be the good deeds. That's how the Sifsei Chachamim understands its Rashi. In other words, the pasuk didn't digress, so good deeds are children. By the fact that that's listed before its physical children means good deeds are considered a stronger indication of one's children than their actual children may be. That's how the Sifsei Chachamim understands Rashi. Let's see what the Gurriere does. The Gurriere starts off like him, but then he says something very different. So let's see the Gurriere. The Gurriere says, Umasha Amar, and this is in the middle of the piece of the Gurriere. He says, Umasha Amar she'ikr told Osean. Where did Rashi get this idea from? That the ikr told Osean, that the main way to gauge someone's toldos, their generations, are look at their Ma'asim Tovim. Where did Rashi get it from? So he starts off by saying exactly really what the Sisei Chachamim did. He says, Hainu, why would you say that someone's ikr, that their main generations are their good deeds? Where does that come from? Because, as the Sisei Chachamim said, which one did the pasuk list first? The pasuk first listed the good deeds before it listed the actual children. So obviously they're both considered toldos, but now it's saying what's considered the ikr, what's considered the most important. Shema mina she'elu ikr. So you see, by the fact the order in which they're listed, it must be that the good deeds are considered the more primary. So while they're both considered toldos, the actual children are toldos, and a person's good deeds are toldos, the good deeds are the ikr. Those are the main, that's the main focus of what someone would call their toldos, their generations. So he starts off by saying the same as the Sisei Chachamim, but then he says another idea. And this other idea is very different. Look what he says next. V'yireh li, it appears to me at time, I've got another reason. Why would you say that someone's toldos are their generations, and you have to gauge, is it their children or is it their good deeds? Why would their good deeds come to the surface first? Why would those be called the ikr, the main idea of toldos? So he says a very different idea. It's not based on the pasuk. It's based on a savara. It's based on logic. What does he write? The Yirli Atam. It appears to me the reason mipnei shebetoldos, when it comes to generations and producing children, meshutav ha'adam im hakadosh baruch hu yisbarach shema. Man isn't acting alone. Man and woman, when they produce children, they're not acting alone. There's a third party involved. They partner up with God. The Gemara tells us that when every child comes into this world, there are really three partners who are involved in the process. There's the man, there's the woman, and there's God. A man and woman could get together all they want, but it's not going to produce a child unless God intervenes. So there are three partners involved with producing children. God is clearly involved. And if I had to ask you, of those three partners, who's considered the primary? Of course, God's the primary, and the humans, the man and woman, are only secondary. But now, when we look at a person's good deeds, those are uniquely tied to the person who did those good deeds. God's not in the equation. If I decide I'm going to help an elderly woman cross the street, if I decide I'm going to, pick the mitzvah, go visit the sick, I'm going to give tzedakah, I'm going to learn Torah, daven, whatever the mitzvah may be, that wasn't God who was involved. That was me. I had to schlep myself out of bed to do that. I had to put in the work. I had to expend the effort, spend the money, whatever it is. When I do a good deed, that's all on me. That's all on my shoulders. No one was carrying the load with me. So therefore, that's why, yes, they're both considered toldos. A person's children are considered their toldos, their generations, and their good deeds are considered their generations. But you know why Ma'asim Tovim, good deeds, are considered the ikr, the more primary, the more important, the more prominent of them? Because that was one, I pulled that off on my own. I didn't have godly assistance with that one. I had to do that all on my own. I had to exercise my bechira. I had to exercise my free will. And I had to sacrifice, whether that was sacrificing my beauty sleep or giving up some of my wealth, whatever it was to perform that mitzvah, that was all on me. So while they're both considered toldos, the Gurriere is suggesting a savara. Here is a logical reason why mitzvahs and Ma'asim Tovim might be considered the ikr, because the person had to expend more work to pull that off. He didn't have God's assistance in that. Yet when it comes to producing children, God is a shutaf. God is involved in there, and in a sense, God steps up to the front. But Ma'asim Tovim, that's all on me. That's all on you, each one of us. When we do a mitzvah, when we decide to exercise our free will and to get involved in the performance of a mitzvah, that is all us. And therefore, that is the ikr. Between the two, between Ma'asim Tovim and children, Ma'asim Tovim would be seen as the ikr of toldos, of generations. I think to me, this is a very, very important lesson, because sometimes we might minimize how important mitzvahs are. We might minimize how important Ma'asim Tovim are. Okay, what's the big deal? But Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei tells us, Chacham Lev Yikach Mitzvos. Someone who's wise, someone who has got a head on their shoulder, run, chase down every opportunity we have to perform a mitzvah. Get them, chop them, grab them while we can. Why? Because we've got a limited span. It's like where you have a shopping spree. Back in the days when there was a Toys R Us and stuff like that, they used to always give out every now and then a shopping spree. I remember as a kid, there was always sweepstakes for a Toys R Us. About, imagine you're giving an empty shopping cart and you could run up and down the aisles. You had 3 minutes to fill your cart. That was a common thing they used to give away in sweepstakes. I remember in the cartoons and stuff, you could, send in a prize form to win a shopping spree to Toys R Us. And I remember as a kid, you're thinking, man, it can't possibly get better than that. To have 3 minutes to fill your cart in a toy store, that would be crazy. So in a certain sense, that's what our life is. We've been given 120 years, which in the big scheme of things is a small amount of time to fill our shopping cart with Torah and mitzvahs. And that's what Shlomo Mel says, Chacham leiv yikach mitzvahs. If we've got our head on our shoulders, if we're wise, we ought to look for those opportunities to fulfill mitzvahs and grab them by the fistful, because this is our shopping spree. And every now and then we may become a little bit confused about saying, come on, is it that important? So we see this idea from this Rashi and this Gurriere, and it says, yeah, this is huge. That's a big deal. These are Iker Toldos. This is the main impact we'll make on this world, are our Maisim Tovim. The main lasting legacy that we're going to leave are all based on our Maisim Tovim, on our mitzvahs and our Maisim Tovim. So let's grab them. Let's use every opportunity we have to maximize that time and to make the most of this opportunity to fulfill as many mitzvahs and be engaged in as many Maisim Tovim, good deeds, as we possibly can. Those are some ideas on that first Rashi. Caught my eye this year. I want to share with you the second Rashi. The second Rashi goes back on the pasuk. Again, let's look at the pasuk. The same pasuk that we began with, pasuk Tes, says, Ela told us Noach. The Torah is about to tell us the generations of Noach. And what do we need to know about Noach? Noach ish tzaddik. He was a very righteous man. Tamim haya b'dorasav. He was very wholesome, perfect in his generation. Es Elokim is halech Noach. And he walked with God. Let's go to page number 2. We're going to go look at the next Rashi. Rashi, there's a very famous Rashi. It's quoted, and a lot of people darshan on this. Let's see what it says. B'dorasav. The pasuk made a point of telling us that Noach was, again, in the first pasuk, it said, Ish tzaddik, he was a righteous man. Tamim haya, he was wholesome, he was perfect. B'dorasav, in his generation, he was perfect. What does that seem to mean? So Rashi tells us there's two inferences, competing inferences, that someone could make from that word in the pasuk. Now, the fact that the verse says b'dorasav, that yes, Noach was a tzaddik, but he was a tzaddik in his door, in his generation. What does that mean? There are 2 ways to understand that. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Yesh me rabosenu. There are some of our sages. In the Medrash, you'll find that there's some of the Tanaim, Darshim Asol Shevach, and they use this to praise Noach, to sing Noach's praises, and to say, this tells us a lot about his character, that if he could be righteous, Midorosav, in his generation, where he was surrounded by no good mix, and we all know every human being is affected by their surroundings. So in his generation, where he was surrounded by crooks and lowlifes and immoral people, if he could rise to the top and be a tzaddik, kol shekain she'ilu haya b'dor tzaddikim haya tzaddik yoser. If he had lived at a time where he was surrounded by tzaddikim, by righteous people, he would have even been greater. So it's singing Noach's praises, some say, that if he was a tzaddik b'dor rasav, if he found a way to be a tzaddik in his generation where he lived, oh my gosh, could you imagine what he would have become if he lived at a better time? So that's singing his praises. And then he goes, V'yesh, but there was another group of Tanaim who saw it diametrically opposed. They were 100% opposite. V'yesh sh'darshim osol l'ganai. And other Tanaim look at this word darasav and they darshan. They expound on that, and they say this is speaking about Noach and it's putting him down. It's saying, Lefi Daro hayat tzaddik. Yeah, Noach was a tzaddik. Compared to whom? Compared to all the lowlifes that he lived around in his generation. Vilu haya b'doro shel Avram, had he lived a few generations later, in the time of Avram Avinu, lo haya nechshav l'klum. He would have been like just water off his shoulder. It would have been nothing. Compared to Avram, who would have even noticed Noach? So look at these. They're worlds apart. The first group of Tanaim, they look at Noach and they see it's singing his praises. Wow, if he could be righteous in a generation that was as immoral as that, Wow, could you even imagine how great he would have been if he lived at another time? And the second group of Tanaim learn it exactly the opposite. And they say, now, look at Noah. If he was a righteous, yeah, because look at his competition. That was around all the other lowlifes, he was called a tzaddik. But if he lived at a better time, if he lived around Avram Avinu's time, no one would have ever noticed Noah. What's odd about this and what's shocking is how different these two opinions are. Oftentimes, you'll see Rashi will bring a couple of opinions. Okay, they're different, but are they worlds apart? These two, they're diametrically opposed to one another. One is basically singing his praises and one's putting him down. Very, very strange. So I want to share with you a fascinating comment I saw this week on this. And this is from, we've quoted him before, Rav Simcha Zissel. Rav Simcha Zissel Broid, or Brody, some pronounce it. So he died in 2000. Rav Simcha Zissel served for 40 years as a Rosh Yeshiva of the great Hebron Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. Again, we've quoted him before. Rav Simcha Zissel was a young man in the yeshiva around the same time that Memphis' own martyred Dave Shainberg had studied in the Hebron Yeshiva when it was in Hebron. So Rav Simcha Zissel was there too around that same time. Tragically, Dave Shainberg was murdered in the Hebron massacre in 1929. Rav Simcha Zissel was actually not in Hebron at that time. That's why he died. And Rav Simcha Zissel went on to live a long life. He passed away in 2000. But for 40 years, the last 40 years of his life, he served as a Rosh Yeshiva, one of the heads of the Hebron Yeshiva. After the massacre, it relocated to Yerushalayim. So I saw in Rav Simcha Zissel's Sefer, he has a beautiful idea on this. And I want to share with you because it was very unique. So he picks up on this, the point that we just raised. It says as follows, Perish Rashi, he quotes Rashi. Rashi said, as we just read, Yesh Meraboseinu. When it says Noach was a tzaddik and he was tamim haya b'dorasav, he was very wholesome, he was perfect in his generation. So Rashi says, Yesh Meraboseinu dorshano sola shavach. Some of our sages understand this to be singing Noach's praises. Kol shekain, it seems to be saying that certainly shilu haya b'dor tzaddikim haya tzaddik yoser. If he had been surrounded with tzaddikim who would have uplifted him, he would have even achieved greater heights. If he could be a tzaddik in a time of wicked people, could you only imagine how awesome he would have been at a time of tzaddikim? That's singing his praises. But others learn it that it's putting him down. Others learn it that it's putting him down. Yeah, in his time, he was a tzaddik. But Vilu Haya B'daro Shel Avram, had Noach lived at the time of Avram Avinu, when there was that kind of tzaddik around, so then, Lo Haya Nechshav Klum, he wouldn't have been noticed, he wouldn't have stuck out at all. So here's Rav Simcha Zissel now. V'tzarech la'avin, we have to understand, Ma chriach es hadorshim l'ganai lidrosh came. What could have motivated those who wanted to see something in this pasuk to put Noach down? What motivated him to see it this way? We all try to see the best in people. If you are those sages in the Medrash who look at this pasuk and you see, no, this is a put down of Noach, why are you viewing it that way? Why aren't you viewing it like the first way, like those sages who said it's singing his praises? What about this pasuk might indicate that Noach is being put down? Hello, pshuto shel mikra, a plain reading of the text, Husha Torah me'ida al Noach. The Torah seems to be testifying about Noach, shematza chen b'nei Hashem, that he found favor in the eyes of God. If that's the case, why on earth would someone look at these psukim and say, no, I see it's putting Noach down? Who's got such a jaundiced eye? Why are they looking at it this way? Good question. Never thought about it prior to this year. And I want to share with you what Rav Simcha Zissel does to answer it. He has a fascinating answer based on trup, based on the musical notes, the cantillation marks that are used in the pasuk. This is fascinating. I've seen this before. Real Baalei Diktuk, real people who understand Hebrew language and understand the Tamei HaMikra, all the cantillation marks. I've seen that they'll sometimes do this, but this is amazing. I'm not such a Baal Diktuk. I don't know the secrets of the Hebrew language so well and grammar, proper grammar so well. And I don't know to look at the Tamei HaMikra, that the cantillation marks, the trup so well, to say, okay, that might hint to the meaning of the pasuk. But there are people out there who do know this, and Rav Simcha Zissel apparently did. Before I read to you what he wrote, let's just take a look at the trup. I'm going to just go back to the pasuk. Look at the trup. The pasuk reads like this. That's called, that first sign that you see there, that is, I have to even look at it. That's mahapach. It's been a while. That's mahapach. So it says, Eile, that's Eile, Toldos Noach. Then it goes Noach. And then this one here, it says ish, and then it's a new one, tzadik, tamim haya b'darasav. So we're going to look at these notes, and you're going to see what they're called in a second. So let's see what Rav Simcha Zissel does with this. I thought this is fascinating. So I have here on the sheet, I put down these marks, so you'll see which one he says. V'nira levaer, it appears as follows. This is how you can look at the pasuk and see that there is a hint that the pasuk might be putting Noach down. V'nira levaer, shehadorshim es Noach leganai. Those Tanaim, those sages who look at the pasuk and they see that it's putting Noach down, Lamdu Kain, they learned this, mitame hamikra b'pasuk zeh. They took note of what our Mesorah, what is our tradition of the cantillation marks. Remember, the cantillation marks are not written in the Torah. It's a Mesorah we have. So he's going to say that they looked at the cantillation marks, and there was something in the cantillation marks which seems to indicate how to read the pasuk. And the pasuk will be putting Noach down. How? Sharei al tevos ish tzadik, on the words ish tzadik. So what are the cantillation marks? Hatamim hem mercha and severe. So what is a mercha? Mercha is this right here. I got the cursor. And severe. Severe is here. Severe goes severe. So he says on the words ish tzadik, it just goes ish and then tzadik. That's that. And then what happens? Vilu b'tevos, but at the next words, tamim haya b'dorasav. So what's those? What's on tamim haya b'dorasav? Hatamim, what are the cantillation marks? Mercha, tipcha, esnachta. Those go together. Mercha and tipcha flow together. Mercha, tipcha, mercha, tipcha, and then esnachta. So what did he have? He had with the ish tzadik, he had a mercha and a severe. Mercha, and then severe. And then tamim haya b'dorasav was mercha, tipcha, esnachta. Tamim haya b'dorasav. So let's see what he does. Umikach lamdu, from the trap, what do you see? What did they learn? She'ilu hayatame akriya tzadik tamim, if they had flowed together, that it said that Ela toldos Noach, and then it says Noach tzadik tamim. If they were grouped together, tzadik and tamim, if they were grouped together, that he was a tzadik, and then tamim, complete. He was a complete tzadik. If they were grouped together like that, then vaday hayadorshamos es Noach l'shevach. That totally would have led us, that would have indicated that we should sing Noach's praises. But since according to the way the trop, the cantillation marks are, hapasuk nikra, the way that we're told to read the pasuk is, tamim haya b'dorasav. Those three words go together. Tamim, that he was complete. Tamim haya b'dorasav, he was complete in his generation. Mashma, tamim lo musav al Noach is tzadik. Tamim is not connected to the words when it said Noach was an ish tzadik. So in other words, Tamim is like independent. It's saying Noach was a tzaddik, and then it says, yeah, Tamim haya b'dorasav. That was complete in his generation. What does that indicate? Aval b'dorasav. It's only on his door, on his generation, he was Tamim. Umizeh, from this, Darshu shedavka b'doras hayu Tamim. Only in his generation was he wholesome and complete, a full tzaddik. V'ilu haya b'doras shel Avram, had he only been in the generation of Avram, lo haya nechshav klum. He wouldn't have amounted to he wouldn't have been noticed. So the way, this is fascinating. What he's doing is he's reading the pasuk and he's looking at the cantillation. Look at the trop. It says, Eila toldos Noach, and then it says, Noach ish tzadik. It's as if there's a break after the word tzadik. And then it says, Tamim haya b'dorasav, that he was totally wholesome, he was complete in his generation. Had the cantillation been different, that Tamim would have been connected to tzadik, then we would have said he was an absolute tzaddik, no matter what generation he was in. That would have been singing his praises. But by the fact that the way the trop, the cantillation is broken, so Tamim goes with Tamim haya b'dorasav, that indicates that he was completely a tzaddik for his generation, in exclusion had he lived in another generation. I found that fascinating. I've heard of this happening before, that people, again, who are really Balei Diktuk, they could look at a pasuk and they could understand how to darshan it based on the trop, based on the notes that are there. But it's not all that often that I've seen it put into place. And this is an example of someone who did that. And the reason why Rav Simcha Zissel was doing this was because he was trying to get to the bottom of it. Why would any Tanaim look at this pasuk, take it out of its plain reading, and assume that it's trying to find a hidden way to tell us of a shortcoming of Noach? So he says it's there, it's hidden in the trup. The trup seems to indicate how to understand the pasuk. I thought that was a fascinating idea. Let's see one more idea I want to share with you. I thought this was fascinating. This is from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Yaakov Kamenetsky passed away in 1986. And again, after the Holocaust, he was one of the real leaders of Orthodox Judaism here in the United States. So let's see. This is from a sefer. This is from a book of his that I have. It was called B'Mechitzas Rabbeinu. It was written by a student of his in Monsey, New York. Rav Yaakov, the last number of years of his life, lived in Monsey, New York. One of his students in Monsey, New York, printed up a sefer in 2005. It was called B'Mechitzas Rabbeinu, which means like in the close confines of our teacher. Meaning, he says, I'm someone who was close to him, lived in close proximity to him, and he recorded numerous teachings that Rav Yaakov gave over. Some of them are related to the Parshas HaShavua, others were just his insights into Jewish living. But this is in the section in the back that is on the Parshas HaShavua. I saw he had something beautiful in there on our Parsha, and I want to share it with you. So it's called Hachiluk. What was the real difference between Noach and Avram? What was the real difference between Noach and Avraham Avinu? So let's see what he does. He starts by quoting our Rashi. He says, Noach is tzaddik. Noach was a righteous person. Tamim haya b'dorasav. He was complete. He was wholesome in his generation. Perish Rashi explains, Yesh merabasenu darshan osos shavach. Some people explain this. Some of our Tanoim, some of our great rabbis explain this as a way that the pasuk is singing Noach's praises. On the other hand, Yesh darshan osolagnai. On the other hand, there are those who darshan, who explain this, that it's really being critical of Noach, saying that he lived in Avram's time, he wouldn't have amounted to much. So he says, Rav Yaakov says, V'yesh litmoa ala pluktazu. This is a very strange argument. It's very rare that you'll find Chazal, our sages, have such divergent opinions about the same person. In the viewpoint of Chazal, yesh tzadikim shekol maseim tovim. You have some people who are either completely good, or rishayim asher kol maseim ra'im, or you have some wicked people that everything is bad. Just to skip the parentheses for interest of time. Vim kain yesh lavin. If that's the case, we have to understand madua yesh plugta etzel Noach. How do you have this argument when it comes to Noach? In yesh l'shavach o l'ganai, l'shavcha o l'gnoso. Are we supposed to praise him, or are we supposed to put him down? Very strange machlokas. There's such a gulf between them. You have those who praised Noach, and they said the same word, Dorasav, is praising him, that, wow, if he could achieve tzidkus, if he could be righteous in his time, imagine how much he would have accomplished living at a time of great people. And then the others look at the same word, and in the same word, they say, oh, Dorasav, yeah, he rose above the pack in his time, where he was surrounded by such lowlifes. But if he had lived at a time like Avram, no one would have taken notice of him. How do you have such a vast argument about the same person? So let's see what he says here. The Nira, it appears, Lefi Masha Isa b'Chazal. We can explain this based on a comment that our sages Chazal made as well. Shamar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says to Noach, Kadosh Baruch Hu Noach, God says to Noach, Ki oschar ra'isi tzadik lefanai bedor hazeh. In a few psukim later, God says to Noach, out of everyone around, I have seen that you are righteous, the only one who's righteous in this entire generation. So now he's quoting from one of the midrashim. This is one of the midrashim of the Zohar. He says, "V'chi l'shabeach oscha b'fanecha yisitzarech." So the Medrash says, what's God doing? Why is God praising Noach to his face? V'chi l'shabeach oscha b'fanecha yisitzarech. Why is the pasuk? Why is the verse singing Noach's praise? That pasuk is clearly singing his praises, right? God says to him, "Ki oscha ra'isi tzadik lefanai b'dor hazeh." I see about you that you are the one tzaddik in this generation. What's going on? God feels the need to praise Noach to his face? Ella, rather, lomar lecha, it's telling you, shetispalel lefanai v'lo ispalalta. God's almost being critical of Noach. He's saying, I would have preferred, you should have davened for your generation, and there's no indication that you ever did that. What do we know about Noach? We know about Noach that, yes, he worked on this teva, on this ark for 120 years, we're told he worked on it. But there's never any indication in the psukim that he ever davened for his generation, that he ever turned to God and said, God, please help them do tshuva. There's no indication of that. And in this, we clearly see a difference between Avram and Noach. Ki Avram, hirbeli spalel. Avram put in a lot of tefillah, a lot of prayers. Afilu al anshe Sodom, even on the wicked people of Sodom. Ad shahaya roi lecharon af, until he deserved, Hashem got upset at him. He deserved Hashem getting upset because he kept nudging him so much about davening for the people of Sodom. Noach lo ispalel bador Mabul. And Noach didn't daven for the door of the Mabul, the generation of the Mabul. There's no indication in the Torah that Noach ever turned to God. God says, I'm going to destroy them, but you're the one tzaddik, so I'm going to let you live. There's no indication that he starts pleading with God the way Avram pleaded with God by Sodom. Noach doesn't do that. Yeah, he chastised his generation for 120 years. He tried to tell them, anyone who asks, what are you doing? He says, I'm building an ark. Generation's going to be destroyed. You got to clean up your act. So Noach gave a lot of musar, but he never turned to God and davened for them. They didn't accept his musar. They didn't accept his chastisement, but he never turned to God in prayer. That's at the root of the fault. That's at the root of the criticism that Chazal find about Noach. Even though he was a great tzaddik, he never davened for his generation. He probably figured they're too far gone. They're beyond the pale. There's no point in davening for them. The real reason why Chazal, the real indication out there, why Chazal would ever be critical of Noach is because he did not act like Avram. Avram davened for his generation. There's no indication that Noach ever did. And because of that, he was not able to save anyone of his generation outside his immediate family. There's no indication from Chazal or from anywhere in Tanakh that Noach did any davening until he was in the Teva with his family for an entire year. And he was serving all the animals by feeding them. But and taking out the trash and their waste, yom v'layla, day and night, b'meshach shana shlema. After an entire year of putting up with that Gehenna, really, it's a terrible way to live for an entire year. Az yispalel Noach. We have a Masorah when Noach prayed. What did he pray? He said, Hotzia mimaskir nafshi lodos hashemecha. That's in Tehillim, chapter 142 in Tehillim. We have a Masorah that Noach composed that line. Hotzia mimaskir nafshi. Take me out of this imprisonment that my soul is in, lodos hashemecha, so I can sing your praises. So we have a Masorah that after an entire year of being in the ark and taking care of those animals and all their trash and feeding them, that's when Noach prayed. But who was his prayer about? Again, about himself. Take me out of here so I can sing your praises. This is a tremendous lesson for all of us in our time. If Chazal, in other words, what's the point of departure? Why did Chazal start criticizing Noach in our first pasuk? It's not just based on our pasuk. There was something else. There was another indication Chazal had to be critical of Noach. That God seemed to have had a criticism of Noach that he had not prayed for his generation. While he was building this ark and he chastised them, he never was praying for them, that God should allow them or enable them to do tshuva. He never uttered such a prayer. And once we had a reason to criticize Noach, that's why when they see our pasuk, they said, okay, we're going to now see this as another criticism. We'll see this, that when it says B'dorosav, yeah, in his generation he was righteous, but had he lived in another generation, he wouldn't have amounted to much. What got us started down that path to look for criticism in Noach was this other incident. By the fact that Chazal already had one indication that there was a criticism of Noach, that's what led them down this path. But what comes down to this is that the main difference between Noach and his great-great-great-grandson, Avraham Avinu, who's mentioned at the end of this week's Parsha as well, the main difference between them was that Avraham, when both of them were faced in the situation where they were living amongst lowlifes and evildoers, Noach throws up his hands and worries about himself and his family. Whereas Avraham davens to Hashem and says, we can't let them perish. There's got to be some way to save them as well. And we are B'nai Avraham. This is the lesson. Rabbi Yaakov says this is a real limud. This is a real lesson that for us and in our generation, we're surrounded by many people. And we don't even have to look at the world at large. We can look at our own family. Look at Am Yisrael. Look at the Jewish people. There are many, many members. In fact, I would say most of the members of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people, who are not shomer Torah or mitzvahs, who are not observing the Torah, who are not living lives of mitzvahs. What should our attitude towards them be? Let them all go, and we'll get everything started again with our core of shomer Torah or mitzvahs. Is that our attitude? God forbid. We should be like Avram Avinu. If Avram Avinu could feel towards stone to daven to Hashem, and let's find some way to save them and inspire them to do tshuva. So certainly that should be our attitude, not just to the world around us, but certainly to our own family, to our brothers and sisters, the members of Klal Yisrael. Our attitude should be, yeah, there are a lot of wrongdoers that are out there. We recognize that. But God forbid, we don't want to say to Hashem, just erase the board and start over with the minority who are shomer Torah mitzvahs. Our attitude should be, no, Hashem, what can be done to change, give these people a change of heart, that they should have a change of attitude, that they too should come to recognize the truth of the Torah and the mitzvahs and incorporate this into their lives and live lives of Torah and mitzvahs. That's what our attitude should be. Not to just discard them and say, let's do away with them and start over again. But no, what can we do to save them? What can we do to bring them back? Hashem, how can you motivate them to change? That's what our attitude ought to be. And that's how Rabbi Yaakov goes with this. So again, what did we see in this first pasuk? We saw just on the second point, we saw a Rashi that said that there were some members of Chazal who looked at this pasuk and sang Noach's praises. Others looked at it and were critical. So the question is, why would you look at this pasuk and see criticism? So we saw that Rav Simcha Zissel said it might have to do with the trup, the way the cantillation marks, that might indicate it. But Rav Yaakov says there might be something else going on. There was another incident in Chazal where they were critical of Noach because he did not pray for his generation. He didn't daven that anybody should return and change their attitudes. Once we know that there was a criticism, that there was something faulty in Noach, and he wasn't this absolute tzaddik, because that's a real area of fault. Now, through that prism is how we have to read the psukim of the parsha. And if we're going to read the psukim through that prism, that's why those sages, this catches their eye. That it says he was tzadik haya, tamim haya b'dorasav, that he was tamim in his generation, through that first prism of knowing that they were critical of Noach for not praying for his generation. So they read dorasav as another point of criticism. Is that, yeah, in that generation, a guy like that could rise to the top. But had he lived in Avram's generation, someone who did pray, did daven for the evildoers in his midst, Noach wouldn't have amounted to much. That's why they saw it that way, in light of that first criticism that was there. So I thought this was fascinating. Two very different answers to the same question about why would anyone look at this pasuk and see something in Noach to be critical of. I thought that was a fascinating approach. All right, at this point, I'm